November 2016. Most of the group was in high school now, and the new COD just dropped. New CODs, I should say, as Infinite Warfare and Modern Warfare Remastered just dropped. Infinite Warfare, a very controversial game which was not liked at all in the group aside from a few people. Besides the zombies, which I will love. Stay tuned for my zombies ranking video. But Infinite Warfare would be tossed to the side for the amazing Modern Warfare Remastered, and things were starting to heat up as another tournament was on the way. This time, finally back to the traditional boots on the ground, which would change a lot in this tournament. Firstly, let's go over the players that would be participating in this tournament. Quite a lot of players would be returning from last season. Jacob, a reigning champion who is looking even better so far on MWR. Chris C, coming off a brutal finals loss but was looking to show out on a boots on the ground COD game. Jason, a player who has made a big jump last season making a quarterfinals appearance. Taher, a player who hasn't looked the best in his last two tournaments but was really looking good on the traditional boots on the ground style. Peter, another player who has improved greatly. Mike, Adrian, and of course, Frosty Steel. Then, we had a few returning faces from previous tournaments, Matosh and Trev. Lastly, of course, we had two new faces coming into this tournament, and one of them would be legendary. Jortix, a solid player, and the absolute legend himself, Dan. Jacob would be the clear favorite to win this tournament as he looked really good in his Season 6 win, but surprisingly looked even better in MWR. Taher would surprisingly be the second favorite to win this, as he had looked very good on the traditional boots on the ground games, especially MWR. Chris C and Jason would be shortly behind, as they were both improving at a fast rate. These are our matches, and round 1 would be underway, and our first match would be a good one, with Jacob, our reigning champion, playing against Jason. Now Jason looked solid last tournament, but wanted to step his game up to the next level, and he went to one person to train constantly with them. And that person would be none other than Will, the 3-time champion himself. Jason would improve greatly with his training, but would it be enough to take on Jacob? Jacob looking good, but Jason almost making an insane comeback in this game, with Jacob being up 13-4 and even 16-8 before Jason would make an almost miracle comeback, but Jacob would eventually close it out, winning 20-16. Chris C would finally get to test himself on boots on the ground, and he would be going up against Adrian. Adrian, a very bad sniper, would make some small improvements going into this game, but it wouldn't be enough, as he played a decent game, but overall Chris C would get a convincing 20-14 win to move on to the winner's bracket. Our next game would be a godlike matchup with Frosty Steel versus Dan. Two lower end snipers, with Dan literally just getting this COD as his first COD, and this match was expected to be legendary. But would it live up to the expectations? Of course it does! Frosty Steel winning, but off a comeback surprisingly, being down 13-8, and would march back to get another 20-19 win versus Dan in his debut. And according to Frosty, he said the only reason this game was close is because he came back from a football game and he was very tired. Next up, we had Matt Tosh versus Mike. Again, two mediocre players, with Mike being a small favorite to win this game. Up to this point, Mike only having one career win and Matt Tosh having 0. This would be a big game for both players. Matt Tosh, earning his first career win in a close fight, winning 20-17, with Mike looking okay, but very sluggish overall. Now, this would be a weird one. Trev would forfeit against Peter for unknown reasons. And also, Jortix would forfeit versus Taher for unknown reasons, sending Peter and Taher to round 2. And actually, Peter and Taher would be playing against each other in round 2. Taher being a solid favorite to win this game, but these two did play last season in BO3, which actually saw Peter winning that match 20-17, but this was a different game. Who would take this one? This time, it was Taher, winning in a close fight. Taher, actually being down 11-14 at one point, would make a great run, going on an 8-kill streak and overall capping it off 20-16 to move him on to the winner's bracket of round 3. Our next match had another winner's bracket game, with this one being fairly lopsided as Matt Tosh, who just came off his first career win, would be playing the reigning champion, Jacob. Safe to say, Jacob was a large favorite in this game, and this would come true as Jacob would have a lead from the start and not look back, getting a convincing 20-14 win to move on to the winner's bracket of round 3. Next up, we had Mike versus Jason, and again, a very lopsided match with Jason being a big favorite going into this one. Should be a walk in the park for Jason, right? Wow. This would be a trend for Mike, as he would play terribly against bad players, but actually look decent versus good players, as another nail-biting match would happen with Jason, winning, but looking shaky in this one, having to camp to secure the win and keep him alive in this tournament to move him on to round 3. Next up, we would have two players that weren't the best at all going against each other, with both of them having 0 career wins. Adrian, being a small favorite to win this game, would finally come through, winning in a somewhat close game for most of it, but Adrian making a run at the end to close it out 20-16. Trev, again, for unknown reasons, would forfeit against Jortix, sending Jortix to round 3 and eliminating Trev. Our last match of round 2, we would have Frosty Steel versus Chris C. Another very lopsided match, with Frosty Steel actually having 2 career wins, but both of them were 20-19 wins against very bad snipers, with Frosty barely beating Dan last round. Frosty would stand no chance in this one. Are you kidding me? Frosty Steel would just pull off the greatest upset to ever be seen in history, winning again 20-19, as Chris C would play around a little bit earlier on, but the game stayed close the whole way, as the spectators, Will and Jason, would be in absolute shock that the game was still close, but they would have no idea that they were about to witness the biggest upset in sniping tournament history. Fun fact, Chris C, after this game, was super mad at the Commissioner Will for some reason, asking him for a rematch versus Frosty Steel, and was very mad for weeks, even though he lost the game on his own. So far, as predicted, Jacob and Tar would look like the best so far, with Jacob getting the bye week to the semifinals, but not as predicted, Frosty Steel would be 2-0 so far, and Frosty Steel would again have a huge test in front of him, as he would be playing Taher in the last of the winners bracket matches. Can Frosty Steel pull off yet another upset? Frosty, honestly, playing a good game, keeping it close the whole way, but Taher ultimately would end his Cinderella run, capping the win off 20-16 and moving on to his first ever semifinals appearance, and Frosty Steel would move on to the quarterfinals for his first ever playoff appearance. Yet again, Jortix, for unknown reasons, would forfeit versus Chris C, sending Chris C to play Frosty Steel in an epic quarterfinals rematch. Our next match, we would have Peter versus Adrian. Peter being a decent favorite going into this one, as Adrian hasn't looked good at all so far. This should be a fairly easy win for Peter, right? another nail-biter, as Peter would have a manageable lead for most of the game, but Adrian making a late-game effort, making it 19-19, but oddly making a weird excuse saying his controller wasn't working and turning slightly away from Peter for the game point, getting Peter a 20-19 win to move him on to the quarterfinals. Our last match would be another lopsided match with Jason being a good favorite to win this game versus Matosh. But, as we saw in some of our other previous matches, a lot of near upsets and upsets were happening. So, this could happen in this game too. Nope. Jason, looking really good, would obliterate Matosh, dominating the whole way and winning 20-8, moving him on to play Peter in the quarterfinals. The rematch, Chris C versus Frosty Steele. Chris C still being a favorite, but a very small favorite this time after Frosty's massive upset, and Frosty looking actually very solid in this tournament so far. Would he have another win in him to make it to the semifinals? This time, Chris C was not going to go down, winning in dominant fashion 20-9 to officially eliminate Frosty Steele and move Chris C on to his third straight semifinals appearance to play Taher. Our next and last game of the quarterfinals would have Jason versus Peter, a fairly lopsided match with Jason being a big favorite to win this game, as Peter looked just okay so far, and Jason just came off a big win versus Peter's brother, and Jason would do what was expected to happen, dominating the whole way through and winning 20-10, eliminating both members of the Peter family to move on to play Jacob in a rematch in the semifinals. So far, the playoffs had a very boring start, but this could potentially change with these semifinals, as we had the original 4 favorites to win the tournament all here, and our first semifinals match would be a good one, with Chris C versus Taher. Chris C coming off a dominant quarterfinals win to get him here, and Taher looking really good so far in this tournament. This should be good. Actually, this is probably the worst semifinals game you will ever see, as Taher would absolutely start spawn trapping Chris C, looking unstoppable, and Chris C would rage quit, sending Taher to his first ever finals appearance. Our next semifinals game would be good, right? Jason versus Jacob. Jacob, looking unstoppable so far, keeping his momentum from his last tournament win, and would be rematching another player who has looked quite good coming off back-to-back dominant wins, making his first semifinals appearance. But Jason would have to win twice to earn a spot in the finals, while Jacob would only need 1 win. This should be a good one. Jason would give it his all, hanging in there the whole game, but Jacob would take the game away, winning 20-15 to send him to his second straight finals to play Taher. So far, the playoffs have been pretty disappointing, but with this match, Taher versus Jacob, which is actually going to be the most spectated game of all time, with Will, Jason, Emil, Chris C, and Peter watching this, is bound to be a good one, though it's no secret that Jacob is the favorite to win this, but this finals would act as a best of 3, as both players would have no losses coming into this one. This one is gonna be good. And Jacob would completely dominate in both matches, continuing 2 trends, one of them being that almost every playoff match in the season was not fun to watch, and the other one is that no finals game has been close so far. Jacob, looking very unstoppable, would cap off a back-to-back tournament win for the first time since Will in seasons 3 and 4, and having one of the best seasons of all time. Alright, and here we go. The best match of the tournament goes to, this is a pretty obvious one by the way, Frosty Steel versus Chris C, round 2. There was a lot of 20-19 matches in this tournament. A lot of them were kind of, for the most part, I want to say like 2 average snipers, but this one was definitely the best because of just how big of an upset it was. I think in terms of spreads-wise, this is the biggest upset of all time. I think it's tied with one other one we won't talk about yet because it's in a future season, but this game was just crazy. Frosty Steel is a very wild card sniper, especially in these older tournaments. He was a big wild card and was capable of kind of winning these crazy games that he was a huge underdog in, and this is a big example of that, beating a sniper that was a lot better than he was, and by a score of 20-19 in a classic nail-biting game. So this is definitely the best match of the tournament. The best underdog story of the tournament goes to, this is another obvious one, Frosty Steel. Now, I mean, there's not much I have to say about this. He was projected 11th, and he made the playoffs. There was no one else that was, you know, that made that big of a jump, and yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Another obvious one, the most loved sniper of the tournament. Once again, he's just collecting all these awards. Frosty Steel, for pretty much the same obvious reasons because of his underdog story this tournament, especially the win versus Chris C, and honestly competing against Taher in round 3, which was pretty impressive. So Frosty overall looking very solid in this tournament, and that's why he earns this award. The most hated sniper of the tournament, and this one is going to be a little bit of a curveball. You would think it's going to be Taher because it's a classic for him, but this one's actually going to go to Chris C. The reason it's going to go to Chris C is because of how much of a sore loser he was after that Frosty Steel game, begging for a rematch, just complaining the whole time for weeks and weeks, and then rage quitting against Taher in the semifinals when he actually did get his rematch versus Frosty. So overall, all that combined is going to make a sniper who is generally pretty loved in his career the most hated actually in the season, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. The most improved player of the tournament, and this might be a little bit of another curveball, this one's actually going to go to Taher. Now, Taher, as we know now, is probably a top 10 all-time sniper, and definitely a good sniper that's probably a little under the radar, but a reason that Taher is that high up is, you know, this season is definitely a big part of that, and Taher kind of went the last 2 seasons winless in the AEW one, and only winning 1 in the BO6 one. So, and he went from that all the way to the finals, looking really good in this tournament, winning every game, but unfortunately having a big collapse in the final. But it was to Jacob, a very good sniper, so it's not the worst thing ever. Jacob kind of dominated through everyone besides Jason, who did honestly compete with him. But Taher made a big improvement, and yes, he was definitely kind of disliked among the group because he was very cocky, trash talky, but a man's got to admit, Taher was very good in this tournament, and he deserves this award. The biggest disappointment of the tournament, this is going to go to Chris C once again. This one's a weird one because, like I said, the top 4 favorites to win this tournament were all in the semifinals, and no one was, like, super disappointing. Like, Peter was 6th, and he did make the playoffs. There was maybe some surprising ones, like Frosty, of course, was surprising. But I'm going to give this to Chris C just because of that semifinals collapse, that rage quit, and then also just losing against Frosty Steel. I know, yes, he did get his revenge in the quarterfinals. I do understand that. But he did win off a forfeit in round 3 and then just rage quit against Taher. So I think I have to give this to him. Because Taher made it to the finals, which is better. And of course beat Chris C. Jason honestly had a really good tournament and looked really, really good overall. And this was definitely the start of his arc. So it can't be him. And really the only option that leaves is Chris C. On a competitive scale, I want to rank this tournament a 5 out of 10. This one had, realistically, I want to say, like, 4 to 5 players that had a good chance of winning, so that kind of narrowed it down. Realistically, I mean, Jacob was the best player in this tournament. Jason was the only one to even come close to beating him, so that definitely hurt it a lot. Also, there was a lot of forfeits in this tournament, especially early on. Thankfully, none later on, but there was a rage quit in the semifinals. So, overall, I'm going to say a 5 out of 10, just because the comp... it wasn't the best, honestly. It was definitely one of the lower end seasons in terms of pretty much average win percentage. So, for that reason, it's going to be a 5 out of 10. On a fun scale, I'm going to rank it a 4 out of 10. As a commissioner, this tournament was hell. There was a lot of reasons for this. Once again, a lot of forfeits early on. The second reason is there was a very exciting game between Chris C and Frosty, and Chris C was definitely non-stop complaining about that for a while. For some reason, I don't know why he's complaining about that to me. I'll still really never know the exact reason on why. That was definitely a buffer. And the playoffs was awful. There was actually just no good playoff game whatsoever. Jason versus Jacob in the semis was the only half-decent playoff game. They were all terrible. And for that reason, it's a 4 out of 10 on the fun scale. On an overall scale, this is going to be 1 of 4 tournaments. That is a less than a 5 out of 10. And this one's actually going to be a 4 out of 10, which ranks as the 9th best tournament. Once again, the tournament started off with a lot of really close matches, but like I've been saying, most of the close matches were between really average snipers for the most part. The only close games that I would say are like really fun are probably the ones that Frosty were in. The one with Dan was definitely really fun, and of course his upset versus Chris C was the highlight of this entire tournament. 4 out of 10, like I said, no playoff match was close. I mean, the same reasons I listed in the fun scale. The finals was really dull, so I think the overall scale, definitely a 4 out of 10. There was only a few good moments in this tournament, and yeah, that's pretty much why it's going to be here. The best / personal favorite moment from the tournament, there's only one answer for this. It's the Frosty Steel upset versus Chris C, and that is pretty much hogging all the awards for this, because it is, like I said, it is just by far the best highlight and the best moment of this entire tournament. You could argue maybe Jason versus Mike was a fun one, or Peter versus Adrian, but I disagree, because Peter and Jason were both the favorites in those games, and I mean, they won by 1 point. Of course, 20-19 games are always fun, but you always gotta add in the context to them, and yes, Frosty versus Chris C is by far the best moment of this tournament. There's not even any close seconds whatsoever. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for Season 8. Really, really stay tuned. I will see you guys then.